Okay, so in this previous video we looked at the Vesica Pisces, and today we're gonna move on over to the circadian rhythms, which are the 90-minute sleep cycles. The other thing that this talks about is basically a certain wave, and as you can notice, there are two colors here. The color red and the color black. So we're going to be talking about two synonymous waves that happens primarily through how we sort of understand the healing process at work, which we can also call cycles of transcendence or the journey of the awakening. The way also in which the Kundalini, which is a term coming from the Indian tradition that talks about energy arising and falling in a certain pattern. So this is primarily as observed through the innerdance journey, and this is affirmed as well through multiple pathways, observed also through other healing or spiritual traditions. But we're going to be looking at some of the science around this. So we're going to be going into several models. This is by his name is Robert Letham, and this is by Leon Fessinger, cognitive dissonance and the fear avoidance model. So circadian rhythms, it took me a while to get into this. It was only around 3 or 4 years ago before I started to first look at what this meant, and maybe that's a good thing, meaning that I wasn't so much influenced by the journey that we undergo every night when we go into the REM, the rapid eye movement, the dream state, or what it's sometimes called paradoxical sleep. So this should be relevant for all of us because we share this. That this is conventional. It happens to everyone. So on my own personal experience of this, I understood this initially as sound. So if you know my story, parts of which might be documented here. So if you know a little bit and would like to know more about inner dance, how I discovered my own spontaneous arising of energy that showed up as a kind of inner dance, that even if I wanted to seize these bodily movements from happening, that there is this mysterious thing where there is sometimes a kind of shaking, or there are these mudras. In Indian tradition they call this the kriya, the spontaneous release, that maybe science looks at through the reflex action, or even the dream walking state, that somnambulists experience, but hardly looked at, really hardly studied. So let's go back to this. When my body was moving on its own and I was experiencing out-of-body states or heightened states, altered states, whatever you want to call it, it felt like my consciousness was very trance-oriented, somewhere in between the years 2003 all the way to 2012. There was a heightened state of awareness, and a huge part of this time I was experimenting a lot with healing, so I basically became a healer. And I found out that when I touched people, I could help them go into these energetic states where there was sharings of going into past lives or experiencing a lot of vibration, seeing a lot of color, going into the realm of insight. I later found out that besides touching people, I could bring this symmetrical experience to others by exposing them to different sounds. Okay, so this is one of the contributions that innerdance is making in maybe the casual worlds of cognitive science. That it was in fact possible to expose people to certain types of music, certain sounds. So doesn't have to be the kind of music that emanates from this iPhone. Talking about the music of vibration, where the sound of the waves, the wind, the sounds of hand clapping, humming, or the sounds of color, the sounds of touch. That there is a spectrum that correlates different sensory experiences. That sound is just one way of understanding the vibratory states. I was very curious because of the way I was so highly sensitized to the world of energy. And I realized that eventually, and it was a very quick realization, that I exposed them basically to music. My mom gave me my very first iPod, I think in the year 2008. My brother, as a Christmas gift, filled this iPod with a lot of songs. So with a portable speaker, I began to travel around the world. And instead of healing people one by one, I brought people into very altered states as large groups. So this involves both exposing them to sound, asking them to relax in a horizontal position, what in yoga we might call the shavasana, where the arms are extended, eyes are closed, lying in a yoga mat flat on their back. I realized that when I had them in those states and when I would touch them in certain ways, that several things would begin to happen. That their eyelids might start to vibrate and go into rapid eye movement, or they might experience tingling sensations. More and more, I realized that the same experiences that I had as a hermit when I was first beginning to become indoctrinated in this inner dance energy, I could see them taking place in other people's bodies. So this could be like contractions of the belly. But later on, similar to what I was experiencing in my own body, like other people's bodies began to make rhythmic, involuntary movements. So this could be in circles, this could be in like 8 forms of 8. They could be doing these mudras that they may not have learned before, or maybe they stand up, they sit up. But very commonly, a lot of people cry, they laugh, they go into a lot of shaking. So my obligation, my responsibility was to observe exactly why is this happening, how is this happening, what is happening. And one of the very first observations was that there were always patterns to the music. That most of the time the music would begin very relaxed, like exposing them into delta and theta, more than beginning with beta, alpha, or gamma type music that are quite lively, you know, that there almost always seemed to be this pattern. So we would look more at the black line here, that would always start low, really relaxed, deep. Maybe if I redrew this, it would start somewhere here, and then it'd go up and go down, go up. So it's intermixing anything from Pink Floyd to Michael Jackson, you know, like a lot of the popular electronic music of my time. That could be very loungy, very brain state stuff, you know, meditative stuff. Or it could be house music, which would be very fast oscillations to pump your heart really, really fast. So it took me a while before I researched the dream wave, you know, the 90-minute sleep cycles that we go through every night. It's called the Circadian Rhythms. And I was basically shocked because except for maybe a part right here, the kind of music that I was exposing people to almost exactly matched the circadian rhythms. And it was when I began to map out the autonomic nervous system, which had its own way of understanding the descent of one wave as another wave ascends. It became very clear to me what was happening in the trance or the expanded states. That primarily, the first insight that is that it's not always seemingly possible to experience REM awake, mostly because psychology normally defines only three basic states of consciousness, which is very deep sleep, the brain state of which is in delta, somewhere in between delta and theta, which we experience the most in the circadian rhythms in N3, and we're going to be talking about this later on. And then the other state is called the beta state, which is wakeful state. Okay, so this is deep sleep, this is awake, and what we then might call the REM, which is paradoxically when the body is in between delta and theta and when the mind is in beta. So that there are only three brain states, conscious states, non-REM sleep, and REM sleep. So what innerdance posits for us is the possibility that it's actually entirely potential that we could experience a fourth state of consciousness, which is what is wakeful REM. That if there's non-REM, if there's REM asleep, what is REM awake? So it's a fourth possible evolutionary state of consciousness. So that the significance of the inner dance as a wave is our ability to track and even guide people into undergoing wakeful REM, which in a previous video we were correlating as anything from the life review or the spiritual awakening, the Kundalini rising, the psychedelic experience, optimal state or flow states also. Sorry, yeah, I'm experiencing a lot of energy right now. So all of these are to say, if you are a facilitator of energy, or if you are space holding for others, whether it be that maybe you're a therapist of some sort, or you are familiar with the models of transformation and are taking people through these waves, we we are asked to understand the complexity that really just has so much in and around it. When people go into the dream and the REM, it's the realm of the rhizomatic, the realm of the right brain, the life review. It's the realm of the magical, the mythical, and the archaic. It's the realm of the baby. It's the realm of nirvana, coming unto, descending unto the earth. You know, it's overwhelming just how much is felt and how much is seen, and that is what this is. There's a hesitation sometimes to maybe even bring people there if there was a possibility, because there is a way in which we could prepare for this new state of consciousness without necessarily going too far deep before we're ready for it. You know, journeying into the unknown. It's overwhelming because of the very thing that we are shutting down in between the N2 and N3 stages. Okay, so how to describe the circadian rhythms is when we first go to sleep, we are experiencing waves in between theta and alpha. What is being tracked is maybe the mu state. Okay, there are several brain states that aren't just the normal ones that we look at. That there's also mu, and then there's the sensory motor brain waves. We'll go over that in a later video. When you go into N2, these are the beginning stages of sleep, and then you go into N1. N1 is the beginning stages, and then you go into N2 where you experience a little bit more alpha, a little bit more mu, before you are able to drop into a very deep non-REM sleep. So the letter N stands for non-REM. So on N3 is that non-REM 3 stage of sleep where your body goes into muscular paralysis. One of the things that is being studied that might be going on here is that here is where we shift short-term memory into long-term memory. Okay, so the N3 is where our body shuts down also what is called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. The part of us that is the executive governor, the planner, the thinker, the manager, shuts down. And so when we go into REM, we access the mesolimbic pathway, shutting down major parts of the frontal lobe, turning on the striatum. We'll look into that later on. Try not to use too many terms to confuse you here. The whole point of this dialogue is to describe how in the inner dance you basically discovered that the same journey that we go through before we're able to reach REM is exactly necessarily the same pattern of music and sounds and vibration that we expose the body to bring them into heightened states where either they are crying or some kind of illness is being healed. It could be just a lot of sweating. Some people scream very loud, but very often there's a switch in which involuntary bodily movement might happen, which is a shifting into the nonverbal sections of the brain, the right brain, the parallel brain. So that feels for me significant, that we could condition people into undergoing the mapping of the life review, that they could go into whole systems through ways in which we could facilitate them. The main insight, if we could word it, might be this could be a map that tells us how we could learn to dream again, or we are learning to dream awake. That human evolution points towards our understanding that this is how change happens. But it also talks about this paradox, this polarity, this sense of irony that we need to be down here as we are up here, that we are considering the end of the binary, the death of separation, and the birthing into unity, where both ego and consciousness, dualities, and all binaries find a meeting point through the balancing of both the sympathetic and parasympathetic, as we spoke about in the last video that focused on the autonomic nervous system. And now bringing up the circadian rhythms as both a map and a tool that could either bring modes or innovations of facilitation all the way to ways of simply observing objectively, either through research studies, going into exercises in pattern recognition, and correlating those different models of heightened states that I keep mentioning, which are the dream states, the hallucinogenic phenomena, the psychedelic phenomena also, the spiritual awakening, the Kundalini rising, and the near-death experience, which is when we can see as much of the totality, the ontological truth, what is the a priori idea, the blanket term, or the big picture awareness, the larger context, maybe the essence of life, or the point of view, that is the point, that we lost the point, and now that we are accessing the yin and yang, the masculine and the feminine, not as an either or, but as an and inclusivity, that is the destination of our journeys of descent and ascent through the culture and the unraveling of time we call the human process. So I want to again thank you for joining me in today's little sharing that took quite a lot of energy to unravel. So I'm hoping you appreciate the kind of work that brings us here to this way of intimate sharing. So let's see what comes up in the next videos. Until then, goodbye.